There's something about the Porsche experience that's almost parasitic. Okay, I know that doesn't sound like a compliment, and it's at least a little far-fetched, but it all comes down to the way that it embeds itself in you, controls your thoughts, and more importantly, your desire for more.
But not all Porsches are created equal, and that's why we have with us today both the Taycan and the 911. It's for science! Okay, not really, but when we were given the opportunity to drive the GTS versions of both, I just couldn't say no. Plus, the 911 is the quintessential Porsche. You know, it's got that big engine in the rear end, plus all sorts of big eggplant emoji energy. And when you see one out on the roads, you know exactly what it's all about.
And then there's the Taycan, which is a glimpse into the future, not just of Porsche, but the auto industry at large. The question really comes down to whether or not it can embed itself in you the same way as its legendary sibling. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that.
All right, so I love this hat, but I gotta take it off for this because it's not 100% my style. But I am now driving the Porsche 911, and this is one of the world's most iconic sports cars, and it's celebrating a massive milestone this year. The 911 has turned 60. So behind that is so much history, so much fandom and lore. And honestly, the 911 is so personally important to me as well. It is the car I had posters of in my room growing up. I had cutouts all over my locker and all over my agenda. My parents had a 911, and in fact, after I was born, they drove me home from the hospital in one. So I honestly feel like I have a spiritual connection to this car. You know, last year I was lucky enough to drive a 911 GT3, and it brought me to literal tears. Like, I was crying tears of joy because I was so happy and I felt so connected with that car that I do think I have a spiritual connection to it, which sounds crazy. But anyway, before I start sounding too much like a fangirl, this is the Carrera 4 GTS. And GTS is really where performance meets comfort. So it has all of the go fast parts that you love, except with more focus on long distance driving. And I think it blends the two really together. But at its core, performance remains the most important aspect of this sports car. Like I said off the top, this 911 is powered by a 3-liter turbocharged flat 6 engine. It has 472 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. With the Sport Chrono package and launch control, it gets from 0 to 100 in just 3.3 seconds, which is a little bit faster than the Taycan. It doesn't really make a difference, but it's something to brag about. So the 911 I'm driving has the 8-speed PDK transmission, and it is honestly fantastic. Obviously, this is a Porsche. They know a thing or two about amazing performance. But to be quite honest, it's not the one that I think I would pick, or Dan. You know, we're both huge fans of the manual transmission, and when it comes to sports cars like this, I just really prefer that extra element because I just think it's more fun. I know it's slower and, you know, generally not as efficient, but those things don't really matter to me because this sports car is so focused, and I think the manual would add just an extra element of engagement and fun. The other thing about the 911 is that it has a lot of technology at play, and sometimes that can feel like it's distracting a sports car from its purpose, but I still think that the core focus of this 911, which is performance, shines through so strongly. And it really comes through when you drive it. You know, everything speaks to you. The steering is so heavy, but it is incredibly precise, laser surgical precision, and it's a huge highlight for me. This one also has rear wheel steering, and not that it needed the help, but it helps this 911 dive into corners so confidently. And I really enjoy the way the 911 just feels like it's pivoting. No other car can give you that sensation. And I think that's one of the things that makes the 911 so, so special. This GTS 911 is also pretty interesting. You know, they took out the rear seats to save 55 pounds. They used less sound insulation, which is actually fine because I can hear more of what's happening on the outside. Even you can hear little pebbles pinging off the undercarriage. And I think that just adds another level of engagement that you simply can't get in the Taycan. And not that it's a bad thing, I just think it makes everything a little bit more exciting. So all in, I know that I am a self-proclaimed 911 stan, but the numbers back it up. It has that huge, amazing history behind it. It has all these accolades. It's an award-winning vehicle. There are so many things that I can say about this 911, but I think for myself and for so many others, it's a dream car and it has that dream car status. And as great as the Taycan is, it just can't live up to what this 911 can offer. And this 911 is so addicting to drive. I'm really sad that I'm gonna have to give it back.
Now for this Taycan. And yes, this is a GTS as well, although I will say it feels far less back to the basics even than that 911. And that's really the nature of electrification, as well as all of this modern technology. I mean, I've got 3 different touchscreens in here, one in front of the passenger seat, the one here for the infotainment, and then this secondary one that works as kind of a catch-all menu so you can cycle through the infotainment options as well as the climate control. Anyways, the other thing about this, it is heavy. It weighs 1,600 pounds more than that 911 GTS, and you can feel all of it. Of course, that's because of the big battery pack that spans the entire floor. It's got 83.7 kilowatt hours of usable capacity. It's quite big. And if you hook this thing up to a DC fast charger, it maxes out right around 270 kilowatts of speed, I believe. It's good for 5 to 80% charge in about 22 minutes. That is in ideal conditions. Yes, that is the disclaimer I use every single time because there's a good chance you are not going to hit those perfect conditions every time, but you should know that it can, in a perfect world, do that 80% jump in just over 20 minutes, which is pretty impressive. This thing also has 390 kilometers of range officially, but this one is showing way more than that, about 475 kilometers on a full charge, which I think is pretty ideal, especially for a car that's just as much about performance as it is everyday driving. Anyway, this is supposed to be less about those EV essentials and more about the fundamentals of this car and that badge on the hood. And I really think the cool thing about Porsches is that there is a familiarity from one to the next, although they are very different, and it does come down to the drive configurations, not just the power sources themselves. So the 911 has the engine in the back, rear wheel or all-wheel drive. This one only comes in all-wheel drive in Canada, 2 electric motors, one at either end, that massive battery pack. Of course, you have the 718 series, so the Boxster and the Cayman, those are mid-engine. And then you've got the Cayenne and the Macan, 2 SUVs. But the cool thing is the Macan doesn't just feel like a smaller Cayenne, just like this thing doesn't feel very much like a Panamera. They're both familiar and completely unique at the same time. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but you feel it as soon as you get behind the wheel. So even a big, heavy electric car like this one, yes, it really is artificial. I mean, it doesn't use mechanical components the way an old 911 would. And I'm not saying this feels like an old 911, but it definitely has a familiar corner carving sensation. Here we are tossing it into this chicane here, and there's a sense of familiarity here that you cannot make up. Now, another part of it really is the vibe you get from the driver's seat. Feels like a Porsche, especially this thing and that 911. When you take a look out this windshield, you've got those big bulging fenders. That is a big part of it. This mail slot of a rear window when you are looking in the mirror. But there's a sense here of Porsche-ness. I know that that might sound a little weird, especially because that word is completely made up, but it's true. You feel it. It really is a vibe that's been captured here across the entire lineup, right up to and including this all-electric Taycan. But of course, the way this thing is powered really is what sets it apart, because no matter how the chassis feels, the suspension, the steering, all that good stuff, there's no changing the way electrification feels compared to internal combustion. That's just one of those things you cannot change. But that's definitely not a complaint, because this thing has all kinds of power. It's instantaneous. It's got 510 horsepower, but then when you activate launch control, you get 590 horsepower to go with 627 pound-feet of torque. Of course, that's more than that 911 makes. It's also so easy to tap into with or without launch control, whether you're from a standing start or you're already moving, especially when you spin it into Sport Plus mode here with the steering wheel. I mean, this thing is a thrill. No, it's not the exact same as a 911, but that is A-okay with me.
It is kind of tricky to articulate how these cars feel after driving them back to back, and I know it sounds super wishy-washy to say, they're similar in some ways and different in other ways, but that really sums up this whole 911 versus Taycan scenario. They both have this underlying Porsche-ness to them that's very obvious, yet they both feel so different based on what's powering them and how they deliver all of those goods.
But it brings us back to the big question: is the Taycan as addictive to drive as the 911? And I think we both agree that the right answer is probably not quite, although it comes pretty damn close. That specialness of staring down the hood stays with you well after you climb out from behind the wheel. And in my case, give the keys back to Porsche Canada. It's a sensation that defies what powers these things, and it's proof that no matter what the future holds for this brand, its fans are going to be driven to keep coming back for more.